I'm AJ Bianco from Podcast PD, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows in the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning, or it may be afternoon, or it may be well into Sunday. It all depends on where it is that you're joining us from. But wherever it is you're joining us from, I thank you, as always, from the bottom of my heart, for all of your continued support. Thank you so much for all the likes, the shares, the follows. Guys, please make sure you visit our YouTube channel and subscribe. But thank you so much for all of the support, all of the love, and obviously making those connections to our amazing guests has been something that's great. So I've been hearing a lot of great feedback about that. So thank you. And today, ladies and gentlemen, today I have the honor of welcoming back a previous guest, Mr. Jonathan Cranford. And Jonathan has been, from the first time that I met him, we were talking about the art of ISS. And that's another great book that he has. But today we're talking about a topic that is very personal, and being an educator and even growing up, him and I, and hearing his story and reading his story through his amazing book called The Sugar Demons. Please make sure you check it out. I'll be sharing the link in the chat, and also it'll be on the show notes. But understanding that teaching and in education can be a stressful situation, and oftentimes the way we cope with stressful situations cannot be it maybe it's not the best way that we do this. So today's episode is titled Tackling the Teacher's Sweets Drawer. And you'll hear a lot about that, as we come on, as I share my story and he shares his story. But again, this is a wonderful topic that I feel needed to be talked about, especially as we draw close to the beginning of the school year. So at this time, I would love to welcome Jonathan. Jonathan, how are you doing this morning?
I'm solid. Thank you again for having me on My EdTech Life. It's an honor to be chosen twice. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And Jonathan, I know, like we mentioned the first time you were here, talking about something that you have been great at and you continue to do. And I know you've been very busy talking about, the art of ISS, in school suspension. But again, bringing you back for this topic and reading through your book, and I'm going to be open and transparent here and sharing, my story. And, obviously you and I, just talking in the pre-chat, we found so many great connections as to why you wrote this book, and a lot of the themes resonate with me. But I just would like for you, for all our audience members that may be joining us for the first time and are getting to hear you for the first time, if you can give a brief introduction and your context and education, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure. So I have been in education for, I guess this is my 12th year officially. I started out on a therapeutic campus where I worked with intense behavior issues. All of my students had a label of emotional disturbance, and also other things, but at base they had to have a level of emotional disturbance. So I did that, teaching high school English on that campus for the first 5 years there, and then I did 2 years of PE on that same campus. That was with every child in the building. And then I switched to in-school suspension. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years on a couple of campuses. That was my intro to education, or been my background in education. The Sugar Demons came about. The book was written, I guess, 6 years ago. I think it's been up publication for 5 now. Wrote it well before Art of ISS. It did influence the second book. Uh, but I guess the way I got started on that journey was well, I had a moment when I was about 36, 37, where I was standing in my kitchen and I was staring into my kitchen trash can, and I was staring at these 2 empty pints of ice cream that I had just consumed. And I think they were both Ben and Jerry's or Haagen Dazs, one of those two. Those used to be my favorite back then. And what I was looking at was evidence, essentially. I was looking into the trash can and I was thinking, okay, let's look at the other stuff around the trash that I just around the empty pints of ice cream that I just put in there, and let me look at what I can use to cover it up. So is there like a disposed, paper towel in there or something I can like kind of scooch them under so that when the next person who opens the trash can in my home comes by, they don't see that I ate 2 pints of ice cream, not one. Now, not that it would have really mattered. My wife and daughter are the only people who would have seen that, and they really didn't judge me or care about anything like that. They would have just thought it was funny. But I wanted to cover that from that or hide that from them because I was feeling this sense of shame. And so I'm looking in there and I'm realizing I'm having this moment where I'm like, oh, I'm ashamed of this. This is what I'm doing right now to cover up something I've been doing from people who really don't even particularly care that much about it. They don't think I have an issue. So I realized this is like a metaphor. Like I'm standing in front of a trash can, and whenever you watch some TV show about addiction and there's someone there who is hitting rock bottom, they're always like, by a dumpster or they're in a dumpster or somewhere around a trash receptacle of some kind. And that signifies rock bottom, right? And for me, it was just looking at my trash can and go, what am I doing? I'm a grown man. And also you have to understand that my wife and daughter also think that I'm the healthiest person they know because I've been a CrossFit coach at this point for many years. I out exercise everybody in the family. I'm the person who, interestingly, I'm the person who gives the nutrition seminars at our gym because I'm obsessed with nutrition. But I'm having this thing where I will, I'll do really well on my diet for a while, and then I'll just binge. And so I didn't have the words for it at the time, but what it really translates to is that I'm an emotional eater with binge eating disorder. And so when I get stressed, I binge. I don't just doesn't mean I don't just snack. Some people, they'll snack all day long. Talk about the treat your sweet drawer. I'm one of those people who doesn't snack really as much. I'll just sit down and I'll binge an entire, 2 pints of ice cream. I'll eat the entire, package of Oreos. I've eaten all 36 that come in the regular pack. I've eaten all 48 that come in the family pack in one sitting. That's just, that's my form of the addiction. So uh, and it's always almost nearly always stress related. So that was kind of where I started and had this moment where I realized, oh, okay, it took me a long time to get there. I'm, well into my, mid 30s or past my mid 30s. And I like, oh, this is something that I'm really struggling with. Why can't I know everything I need to know about nutrition? Why can't I just stop doing this one thing? And that was when I realized, oh, this isn't just a food issue. This is an addiction issue.
Yeah, no, and that sounds very powerful. And even like you said, being as healthy as you are, doing CrossFit, being a coach, doing the nutrition, but even then, still having those urges and those cravings, and doing that binge eating. It resonates with me so much because, like I was telling you, growing up, and again, when I was reading the book, I was like, a lot of this stuff makes so much sense. At the time, sometimes you can talk to people and that have never had that experience, or seen it firsthand, or through relatives or through themselves and so on, and they may look at you and be like, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense. That's just weird. That's just poor, self control and things of that sort." But, myself growing up, Hispanic household, just my parents and myself being an only child, one of the things that when I look back and think about is the isolation portion of it, where it was just myself. My dad was out to work. My mom was working, there at home, but she was busy, doing her thing because she was a seamstress, professional seamstress. So she was very busy. So for myself, it was just, okay, stay in the room, watch TV, and do those things. Well, later on, you find friendship or relationship with your refrigerator, and because you're looking for something to interact with or somebody to interact with, but there was no one around my age, actually, really no other kids at all whatsoever. So I would find myself just continually going to the refrigerator. Even though I wasn't hungry, I could have just eaten, but I would go and just find something to, I guess, alleviate that isolation, that lack of communication, that lack of interactivity, even though I could go outside and run and so on, but you're still there by yourself, in that sense. So growing up, very similar now as an adult transitioning, what you mentioned, that picture of, oh my gosh, I just ate this, and what can I do to hide this, or what can I do to, so people don't know that this is what's going on. It's very interesting. And so, in reading your book, and guys, it's really a great read. I mean, if it's something that you're struggling with and you need to make sure you check this book out, because the way Jonathan explains this is so great, and the connections that you'll make and the tips that he gives are wonderful. But going back to that, then there was a period of time where I got into health, and maybe about 25 or so. I mean, I was at my lightest, like, best shape and everything, but justifying that in a way, still that sugar addiction was still there. I just never really paid attention to it because I was like, "Oh, well, I'm healthy now. I'm doing this. I'm benching this much. I've got a personal trainer." But that urge was still there where sometimes I'd say, "Well, I'm already working out like 4 times, 5 times a week." So, very much like you, it's like, it's Friday night. I'm bored. My friends are doing their own thing. I don't wanna go do that. I just wanna stay home, watch a movie, and drive to Walmart and buy a pint of Ben& and Jerry's, and it was the one that has the caramel there in the middle, and it wasn't just like, "Hey, let's do 1 serving, 1 scoop," or whatever it was. No, it was eating the whole thing. But I was like, I'm fine, this isn't a big deal because I'm working out and so on. So it kind of trickles into that. And then after that, it was like, I'm a teacher, I'm working now, and I just had this stressful situation, this stressful class. I'm worried about, I need to fill out the paperwork for IEPs, do these 504s. And then all of a sudden, the treats drawer that's supposed to be for the kids because they're doing well now becomes your outlet in trying to get rid or of that feeling of that ominous feeling of having to do this extra work or this stressful situation. So a lot of this was just wow resonating with me, and so like I said, I'm being very transparent here. So for yourself, Jonathan, in talking about this, just tell me a little bit more about that experience. Maybe, you going through that sugar addiction. Was it something that you can tie to way back into your early childhood? Or was it something that maybe you started noticing a bit more, as you grew up, got into adulthood?
Yeah, absolutely. So, stress and boredom are typically my triggers. Those are the strong ones. Uh, you know, and you mentioned, that when you talk to people, they might say, "Well, this is weird." But I've noticed now when I talk to people now, when I'm open about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's me too." It's so widespread now. The way our current food environment is, it's so widespread. Everybody is, using food to self-soothe to help them, alleviate that whatever that negative feeling is. So, but as far as my childhood goes, and I talk about this more in the nurturing part, more in the art of in-school suspension, because it's an integral part of what we do with tier two discipline. But it definitely fed into my addiction as as a kid and an adult, because the people that don't suffer from what I suffer from typically were well nurtured. I think that's where it comes from. And I didn't understand what nurturing meant until I was much older, and I'd already had a child. My daughter is a school teacher now. She's been a school teacher for a couple years now. She teaches art, and it's really cool. And she turned out well, but I didn't know what nurturing was until she was already grown up, basically. I didn't know what it meant. I couldn't define it. And what nurturing is, a parent saying, or a teacher saying to a student, or a parent saying to a child, I hear these boundaries I've set for you, and I'm not going to let you cross those boundaries. But at the same time, you're not going to care because there is so much willingness and desire to help you achieve something that the boundaries aren't going to matter, and that I'm going to show you that by giving you my time and attention. And I didn't know that as much. I did try to give my daughter a lot of time and attention. I don't think my parents knew, either. And there's no, nothing on them. I mean, everybody is doing the best they can when it comes to parenting, but I don't think they understood that either. So they did a lot of stuff with me, but there was also a lot of time where they were just too busy. I was a latchkey kid too, like you, and there was just no time. So food became my friend. Thankfully, books became my friend as well. So I love to eat. And you talk about the isolation piece. Oh man, that is, what's really cool is that this generation has a term for it. I don't know what the medical term is, but when you isolate and then you just eat, or you're really self-indulgent, with video games, social media, food, and whatever, you go into that mode. They call it goblin mode. Like they actually have a word for it, and I think it's in the dictionary now or something. So I think Webster adopted it. So it's like, yeah, going goblin mode, not great for your health, but you're doing it because it's part of your coping mechanism, right? And that's the hard part when I'm helping people through this, what we're doing, with the food addiction, sugar addiction, emotional eating, whatever, however you want to refer to it. We're taking away a coping mechanism, and that's not easy. And so it has to be, hopefully replaced with something, and we'll do the work, and we'll get there. But taking away a coping mechanism is not easy.
No, absolutely. And, just going back to that, the coping mechanism for me, like growing up, like I said, it was always just the food, always the food. And it wasn't, and even when my parents were around and we were doing things and, mom would make dinner and things of that sort, it was just like, eat until you're full. Growing up in that Hispanic home, it's like, no, 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 eat some more. No, 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 eat some more. And I was like, I can't. No, 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 you need to eat some more. And so you're just there eating, and then that just becomes like, hey, like I'm not filled. I'm not filled up. Like you don't give your brain enough processing time to say, hey, you're full because you have already like taken so much in that by the time that kicks in, it's like, oh my gosh, you just completely overdid it, and then you feel terrible, but then you feel terrible and you're like, "Oh, I feel bad. Let me go get some ice cream and that's gonna make me feel a lot better," kind of deal. And so then growing up later on, like you started with chapter 1, the way that these sugar demons disguise themselves. It's like, yeah, the way they whisper, it's almost like you hear like, "Hey, you're stressed. Here's a little candy bar. Or, eat. You're stressed. You know what? Just go to the store and pick this up, or snack on this, something salty, something sweet, and so on." And I'm just like, wow. So again, going back to your book, one of the things that I loved about this is I started reading it from the very beginning is number one, just the practicality of it and looking at, of course, the green light carbs. You have such a wonderful list here of things that teachers can easily follow, and it's something for us to just learn. But one of the things that I loved right from the very beginning, talking about the dopamine and the reward system and making those connections that why is it that we act this way? Well, it's because of that dopamine hit, right? I mean, like you talked about social media addiction, it's that dopamine, it's, sugar, that dopamine. So, through your experience, because I know that you work at a behavioral system, like you mentioned in one of these chapters, you started learning a little bit more about what's happening here. So, tell me how that experience helped you kind of tie in what you were going through and obviously kind of inspire you to start writing this because maybe you were seeing this maybe a little bit more amongst friends or, professionals around you.
Well, you see it even in the kids, right? You see especially with the children who were, you know, with difficulties, the ones that have a label of something, SPED or whatever it is, just anything that falls under that umbrella, I've noticed is they get affected worst and first by these things because they don't have some of the supports in place, whether it's, intrinsically or around them that help them to deal with this stuff. So there was a moment one time, long before I wrote Sugar Demons, but I was keyed into nutrition. And when we were giving kids these red popsicles as a reward one day, and it was, and they were the kids that had emotional disturbance and other comorbid issues. And it was like within 60 seconds of them having these red popsicles. I don't know if it was the sugar, it was the dye. They were cheap popsicles. I mean, we're in education, so it's not like we were buying, like we're in a school with like no parent no PTO, with like no support. So like we got the cheapest popsicles, I'm sure, back then that you could find. And the kids just spazzed out, and like it was like they were different children from one minute to the next. And I was like, oh wow, like this is really affecting them psychologically, quickly. This is, it's not just you're either putting on weight or you're not putting on weight. No, there's a physiological cost to this, and it affects, your brain is not separate from your body, so it's affecting the way you think and your emotions and emotional regulation and all of that. um so yeah, you can see it immediately. As far as seeing it with adults, I mean, every teacher, that I nowadays I'm saying every teacher is struggling with this, but it's the country is struggling with it. I put some statistics in there that are now 6 years old. They're actually they're worse now. I mean, I think now the latest statistics are like 9 out of 10 people are metabolically dysfunctional, meaning they're starting to get insulin resistant. They're starting to have issues that are well before diabetes, but they're starting down that path. So 1 in 10 people are not dealing with this, right? They're not struggling. Um, yeah. So, and then the overweight and the obese, I mean, it's over 50% now, overweight. So it's just, you see it around you. I see it in the kids. One thing I noticed from, when I went to school versus versus now is just the population of children, that are overweight is just so much more than when I was a kid, going, growing up, you'd have 1 or 2 overweight kids who kind of stuck out. And now when you go to a regular campus, it's just everybody. So, yeah, it was noticeable, not just, with the teachers, but with the students as well.
Yeah. Oh, and that's something that I absolutely agree with. I mean, being in education for 16 years and seeing the way that the population has changed, and you do see a lot of this. And so, like I said, this is why for me it was great that I get to have you on the show and talk about this, because I know for a fact, as educators, we see this, and of course, it becomes part of our struggle. But again, one of the things that I love to, going back to your book, the practicality of it. One of the things that I loved when I read was activating your power ups. I loved that because it made so much sense. It was so practical and very easy, something that myself I can do, and anybody else that reads this book can do, because you hit on three things specifically, which were the, let me see here. I have it highlighted. I think it was, oh, here we go. The physical, the emotional, and the social. And as you know, in education, it's all three and then some, you know? So a lot of times we need to find, as educators, ways to cope, whether you're a superintendent, and this is for everybody, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're at central office, whether you're a paraprofessional, a coach, a teacher, in any situation, these are things that you're always going to be faced with. And the way that you cope with it is going to be, it's going to make a difference, whether it's something that's going to be a healthy habit or something that's going to be unhealthy. But what I loved was activating your power ups. The way that you gamified this for me and for our listeners and for our, your readers, was something that I found was great. Just finding those little practical tips that, when we are talking about maybe getting that little hit of dopamine, you're in a stressful situation. It's like, I loved, it's like I can go, now what I do is I'll walk over to a coworker and their office and just talk to them just for a little bit, 2, 3 minutes, kind of get that, and then come back. I work, and then, and those little wins, and then you have your power ups. And so, talk to us a little bit about that concept of how you came up with the idea to kind of make it practical in a gamified way for anybody that reads your book to just really take these steps.
Sure. Yeah. So that came from an author who wrote a book called Super Better. Her name is Jane McDonigal, and she's amazing. But she had this accident where she hit her head and she had a concussion, and they put her on what they call brain rest, which is like basically here you can sit on you can lay down all day long, you can stare out a window, but you don't want to give your brain any activity, you don't want to watch TV, you don't want to read. And she's like a PhD, and she's like a double PhD in one is, I think it's, psychology, and then the other is video game design. So she's like this extremely bright person, and then she's on brain rest, and to the point where it's like 6 months later, she still has to do this, and her life is just slipping away. And she's like, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to figure out a way to get out of this situation. And the way she comes up with this, she comes up with this game called Super Better, where she basically is like, I just need to take one tiny step forward every day. How can I do that? And so the process for her, I mean, there's more steps. The way I kind of whittled it down in my book to make it specific for how I do it. But it's, activate 3 power ups per day. And, power ups are anything that gives you either a social, emotional, or a physical boost to give you, like some endorphin, something to kind of get you ready to tackle something, right? And we can go into those. Like a physical power up could be just, do 10 push-ups, or, drink a glass of water or drink a glass of water, or take a supplement, something like that. it doesn't have to necessarily be exercise, but it's a physical power up. A social power up could be like high five a coworker, hug, a friend, or a relative, or, somebody in your vicinity. I know you're a social guy, so you like the social power ups quite a bit. Um, there's, the emotional ones are also cool, like watch cute animal videos, something that gives you an emotional warmth for a few moments. And then it just gives you like a way to kind of, get ready for to tackle something. So that's part one. Part two is going to be complete at least one quest every day. And I think that was important because it was like, just take one step forward, give yourself some momentum on the daily. Not every day is going to be a day where you accomplish a million things, or you make a huge progress towards, fighting this disease, or, even just anything in your life, just getting all the things you wanted to get done at work, but as long as you're getting some things done, you're making forward progress. That's good. So you'd activate a power up and then go tackle a quest. And sometimes you're going to complete 3 or 4 quests, but the game rule is just complete one per day. So initially for one of my first early ones was like, go get a lunchbox, so that you can control your food environment. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to have a good day with eating. You could have a terrible day food wise. You could be completely, active in your addiction, but you got a lunchbox. So you're prepared for something else to happen. Maybe so there's like little steps. And I kind of created like a little step worksheet, at the back of the book to like help people just take one step at a time. Sometimes you're gonna knock out 10, sometimes you're gonna knock out one. It doesn't matter. Just get one a day. And then the last step with super better is fight one bad guy per day. And there's all kinds, you can super better anything. So, for, I did it in a classroom. I was in a super better classroom one time, and I still have my posters up in ISS for work avoidance. We called our bad guy was work avoid Noid, and we had all these steps to be able to fight him. But with sugar addiction, it's obviously, your sugar demons or your, food addiction, whatever you want to call it, that's your bad guy, and you're fighting that every day. So it's almost a step you don't have to think about because you know what you're fighting. So you can try to fight that guy every day. You may not always win in the beginning. You may have some relapses. Like I told you before, that's okay. As long as you learn something every time and you get better. And some people take off and they have, one relapse maybe or none, and then they're good. They just needed to figure out a way to get on the right track. But if you're like me, I really relapsed so many times. Once I figured out what was going on, I put these steps in place, and it wasn't like magic. Everything just worked. It worked fairly well initially, but I still had, moments of struggle. I still had relapses, and I think I've been, I think it's been 6 or 7 years now that I would call it. I would say, I have fruit sobriety. I haven't had binge episodes or anything like that in a long time. But before that, there was a lot of, there was a lot of things I had to learn from. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing that you mentioned that, if you can just talk a little bit more about, I know we talked about it in pre-chat, but it was very important for me reading this in the book too as well was your food environment. Some of the struggles that as teachers, like you mentioned, maybe you don't have enough time or you don't make enough time to meal prep. So all of a sudden you're just going for some quick snacks, or maybe you do have a longer break but some of the food availability around you may not be the best, so it could be very hard to make some of those conscious decisions. So for somebody like myself or anybody else that's listening, can you tell us a little bit about how our food environment also affects the way that we battle with this eating.
Yeah, absolutely. Your food environment, and it's tied to this concept of willpower, which is hilarious because I'm in my book, I'm like, just it's better just to pretend you don't have any willpower because look, it doesn't work. It hasn't worked up to this point. So let's stop pretending willpower is going to save us, right? I once I figured that I was better off I was so much better off because it was like, okay, now I'm gonna organize my life in a way where I don't have to rely on willpower. Food environment is really what teaches you that lesson because your food environment is basically the landscape of food options around you at any given moment. So I'm at home right now. I have all the food in my house. I don't keep junk food here. I don't keep what I call drug foods or processed foods here. Um, if I'm at work, and then obviously I'm at home. There's wherever I can drive to conveniently. Right? It's not 40 minutes away, right? Um, at work, it's the same thing, right? Whatever you can drive to within your lunchtime, or you can order or whatever. That's your food environment, or what you have at work with you, right? So I've learned it's easier to keep your food environment, control your food environment by keeping that lunchbox, that, having your food with you. So the path of least resistance becomes that versus, oh, I have to go get in a car or I have to order something or whatever. Just make the path of least resistance that thing you have with you that's already healthy and appropriate for you to eat versus something that you're going to overeat. And I'll tell you why that's important because you can start off really, really well. Like breakfast for me was always easy. I like eggs and bacon or something that's, typically a clean food that's not going to set you off. Um, and I'd start off the day really well with something like that. And then, I'm like, I have every intention today of going to work and eating something clean. So what's around me? Well, there's Chick-fil-A. No, probably not that. Well, there's McDonald's. No, definitely. What else is in there? Starbucks. Probably not. It's hard to find, really, satisfying, healthy options there. Oh, there's a barbecue restaurant nearby. Uh, Let me see. What could I? Oh, I could go for the grilled chicken breast and some vegetables from there, or maybe some grilled or some just some steak or whatever from there with the and not have not make a terrible food decision or not making a rational food choice. So that's my plan, right? And then what happens is you get to work and you have some, 5 or 10 emails that you weren't expecting to have to respond to, or you have maybe your coworker was out and now you have to split classes, or you have to take on more responsibility than you initially wanted to, or maybe you're involved in something really high stress, like you're or strange or breaking up a fight or something, and then all of a sudden, it gets to that point where it's lunchtime and you are in a completely different mind state. And then you got to drive to, to that restaurant, the barbecue restaurant, and traffic's annoying and you have a time limit. And you're just like, all of a sudden, by the time you get even close to there, you're like, no, screw this. I'm going to the Whataburger drive through. I'm going to get double meat with cheese, number two, double meat with cheese and a large chocolate shake. And I cannot tell you how many times I have done that. Okay. I had every intention of starting out right, but I didn't, when it got to that time of day, the path of least resistance was not the healthy option. The path of least resistance was going through that drive through. Now, if I have my lunch with me, the path of least resistance changes to, well, yeah, I kind of would rather eat something different, maybe, but I usually like the foods that I prepare. That's an important one. You got to like what you're eating, and it's right there, so I don't have to go off campus. I don't have to go anywhere to get it. I don't have to take any extra steps. So it's like this is just easier. So control your food environment is very important. It's step three in the Sugar Demons method, and that's crucial.
Yeah. And, that's very important. And it's really so helpful. Some of those tips, I mean, sometimes we don't think about those things, but, obviously reading it and having those conversations, we see, how you mentioned those stressors, the unexpected comes your way, via email or situation at work. And then it's like, hey, you know what? I just need something to either help me feel better, get that dopamine hit, those endorphins going. And it's like, hey, let me just go to a Whataburger and get this and a shake, and that's got me. And then all of a sudden, then it's like, oh man, I really messed up. I feel terrible. And now it's like, well, might as well, since I already did that, might as well just go eat like this bag of chips or something salty or this and that. And then you're just kind of continually like justifying what it is that you're doing rather than just saying, hey, you know what? Let's stop here. Let's see assess the situation. Let's see what's happening and find that alternative, so you don't continue, in that process and so on. But like you said, it's not going to be perfect always, but you really need to find those wins, in this battle. And so that's why I love the way that you have your book here. And also, we'll talk a little bit about maybe some suggestions that, you may offer up, especially, now that teachers are coming back at the beginning of the year, maybe certain tips that you have, maybe as far as eating or maybe some supplements or something that'll help with those cravings. But one of the things that I also wanted to point out that you did mention is what I love is at the end of every chapter, in the book, you also have like a little cheat sheet, something small and short that people can follow along. And like you mentioned too, in the back of your book, also you'll have, just some stuff that we as are the readers can go ahead and reflect on, make some notes and put this down. And just for some accountability sake, something that is very practical and can help. So I really want to thank you for that. But going back to, like I mentioned, now that all right, full on school is going to be starting, maybe what would be some just helpful guidance for our educators as they come back, as far as maybe meal preps, maybe some sort of supplement that might be able to help to curb some of those cravings. So Jonathan, please share with us.
Sure. So the first thing that you want to start with, place you want to start with sugar demons is to track your cravings, right? That they're not as random as you think they are. For me, it was always right after lunch. Or sorry, right after getting home from work, because I'm stressed from the day I just had, and then again right after dinner, so right before going to bed, and that's probably stressing about the next day. And that was my typical craving time. So your cravings are not random. Occasionally you'll get something here or there, but really they're a lot more predictable than you think. So step one would always be track your cravings. Step two, create a plan around those cravings now that you know when they're coming. For the most part, you can see them coming a lot of the time. And then three, control your food environment, right? We already talked about that. So those are the big steps in sugar demons, which I tried to make as user friendly as possible. So that's why there's all those steps, little worksheets at the back, and then I put a supplement strategy in every chapter, which is super optional. You don't have to do it, but I found there's certain things that work really well to give you some help. I think the number one, I think it's the reason it's the first one would be there's an amino acid called L-glutamine. And it's fairly safe. I mean, it's very safe to take. I mean, it's the most abundant amino acid in your body already. But if it gets kind of, uh, low or just, whatever you're more susceptible to cravings. So you can supplement with it to give yourself extra, and it helps to kind of quash those a little bit. It's not going to do all the work for you, unfortunately, but it's one of those things that you can add to a glass of water, and you can even use it as a power up. It's like, so it's 2 p.m., right? I just got out of work. Usually you're on a high school schedule. For us, it was like we'd get out at like 2. So I would know going home that I was going to need to activate a power up and then eat something healthy. That was part of my plan. So I would do a glass of water with 5 grams of L-glutamine in it, and that was like the first power up. And then I would figure out, okay, now it's time to eat that healthy meal by the time when I get home. And then from there, I would kind of have like an after idea of what I was going to do. And you don't want to like leave too much open to yourself, especially in the beginning, because the sugar demons love it, especially when you go and like you were talking earlier about how when you do mess up, it's like your whole day is blown. You go into that shame spiral
Mhm.
and you're like, okay, well, the rest of this day is done. So I'm just going to keep on doing it. The sugar demons love that. They're like, hey, you already gave in a little bit. So why not, we'll just start it again tomorrow. Like we'll get back on track tomorrow. I learned now that I've been doing this for a while, and I've been on other podcasts that are specifically for food addiction, sugar addiction, now, and I've learned from so many cool people that are in this world, in this community, and they've taught me that those are called permission statements. When you're like, oh well, I'll just get back on it tomorrow. I messed up already, and those are the sugar demons, but I call them sugar demons, but those are called permission statements. You're giving yourself a permission either to do something, because like another one that you'll pop up a lot is like you said, I've been working out pretty good. I'm doing really well. I can just give in, I can just eat this way for a little bit. It'll be fine, but that's just going to set you down a path for more cravings. Another tip is that, it's not hopeless. You're not going to have to, the cravings aren't this bad always forever. Uh, I talk about the promised land in my book, and if you can get sugar, flour, grains, all those things that kind of will give you cravings to set you off, you can get there for about 14 to 20 days at the most. It's a little bit different for some people. It's just 10 days. Other people it might be 20. But if you can get that stuff out of the diet completely, then the cravings die down. You tend to detox, and those cravings go away. Now they're not going to always go away. As soon as you eat something, sugar or highly processed, and they're going to come back, typically with a vengeance. And so, getting the promised land is just your first goal, really. Get to that, get that 10, 20 days and under your belt, and the cravings are going to die down. Your mind is going to be more clear. You're going to probably have noticed a little bit of weight loss already at that point because you're eating differently. And that'll build some momentum. That's not recovery, unfortunately. If that was recovery, that would be great. But that's the beginning of recovery. You get to a little more comfortable place, and you've got some wins under your belt. You've made some positive changes. then there's more work to be done at that point, but it's the beginning of recovery. And I think that's at least, we can get there, we can get people started down the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of things there. Sometimes it's like you feel like, hey, I'm winning, I'm winning, I'm winning. And then it's like, well, I can have this treat. And then again, like you mentioned it, I love the way you mentioned that verbiage. It's like you're giving yourself those permissions, and that's not it's not going to lead to anywhere good if you continually give yourself those permissions. One thing also that I love too that I forgot to mention was tracking your cravings. You're absolutely right. It's like there's always a pattern, for the most part, for myself, it's always in the afternoon around 3 o'clock. So knowing how to stay ahead of that, knowing that it's coming, you're prepared and you're ready. And then all of a sudden it's like you kind of already know those signals, you know what's gonna happen. So then it's time for me for a power up. It's like, hey, you know what, at 3 o'clock, I need to go walk or walk outside or, just visit with my colleague just in the office for a little bit, like 2 minutes, get that talk, and then come back and let's get back to work and so on. So that's really helpful too, like you mentioned. And of course, in everything that you said, it's a process. So that's what I want people to understand that many times, like myself, you get into situations where it's like you just want to find like the one and all solution for everything. But in everything, it's always going to be a process. But I want to let you know that this book by Jonathan, I highly recommend you do purchase this. It is a wonderful read and it's going to help you understand a little bit more about what you're going through. And then, of course, like he describes so many ways that you can go ahead and power up your daily life to, battle against those demons. And so, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here and sharing this, as I felt that this was something that was very important because if it happened and it has happened to me, and dealing with it in our education system in the classrooms, and this is not just for education, but this is in all areas. But for myself, being in this community, I feel that this is a conversation that needs to be had, with our audience members too, as well as they get ready to return to work at their schools, and obviously coming back to those situations where there's going to be a lot of stress, whether it's because of work or the students or, anything else that's put on us. We have to find better coping mechanisms than going into sugars and so on. So, Jonathan, thank you so much. And before we wrap up with our last three questions that we always ask our guests, Jonathan, please let our audience members how they may be able to connect with you if they would love to, maybe possibly say, hey, you know what, we love what you're saying. Can you come to our school and talk? Or, things of that sort. So please let our audience members know where they can reach you, if there's a website, where they can find your book.
Sure. So the book is on Amazon. You can get it paperback, digital, or audiobook. It's on audiobook now. You can also get it on Kindle. So if you have like Kindle Unlimited, you can probably read it for on that. And then if you want to reach out to me, I am at Mr. Cranford ISS on Twitter right now. At Mr. Cranford ISS. And then also we have a website that is for the coaching and professional development for in-school suspension stuff that we do. But I'll come out and talk about sugar. But that's at www.theartofiss.com. That's www.theartofiss.com.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm also going to show this here too. The Art of In-School Suspension, also written by Jonathan Cranford. This is an excellent book. So I highly recommend this. So again, you get both sides of this. You get, obviously the education side of it through, handling in-school suspension, but also like you mentioned, he's willing to come and talk to this, and maybe, principals out there, I challenge you, maybe districts out there challenge you, to maybe, see what it is that's happening and see what we can do more for our teachers. I know that, of course, sometimes it's like, well, this may seem too much, but, a small step in that direction can go a long way for a lot of educators just to help, keep for mental health, physical health, and socioeconomic, or excuse me, social health too, as well. All of that. So again, this is a great start maybe for a book study, so I highly recommend this. So please make sure you contact Jonathan either through his website or through Twitter, or also just, go buy the books on Amazon. They're there and you can have yourself a book study. So I would love to hopefully hear that anybody listening to the show or watching the show either purchases the book or they're doing a book study. Please let us know how that's going. We would love to follow up with you and maybe bring Jonathan back too and have a continued discussion, maybe a larger group, a panel, things of that sort. Because again, this is a topic that is now obviously near and dear to me, but also, like you said, Jonathan's experience and my experience quite similar. And if we're having those experiences, we know that there are many others out there that are also experiencing this. So again, Jonathan, thank you so much. And also for Tanya, thank you so much for joining us here. Mel also joining us from Malawi. Thank you. All right. So, Jonathan, we're getting ready to wrap up the show. And I know you were here a couple months back, with the art of in school suspension. And so we always end the show with the following three questions. So, question number one, as we know, kryptonite was the one thing that weakened Superman. So, kind of going with this conversation, I may, what is your current? My question is, in the current state, and I guess maybe we won't say education because we're talking about, health and so on. But in the current state, maybe possibly of here in the health environment, or dealing with sugar demons, what would you say is your current kryptonite?
Well, so we have this concept of drug food where there's just certain foods that you shouldn't partake of. And it has been there's stuff that I can have now that that isn't going to set me off into a like a binge or anything. I've gotten to a point now where I have better control, and it's okay for me to go. My wife and I are traveling, having a special night or something like that. I can share a dessert with her. Used to be I would have my own and then I would finish hers also. I was in a different place back then. But I still cannot eat the Oreos. I mean, I would say ice cream was always my favorite food, but I haven't eaten Oreos in years because I know there is something. Well, I know exactly what it is about the Oreos. I mean, they are engineered. It's called bliss point engineering. Like they're engineered to hit your bliss point, which is it's a real thing. Like in the 90s, there was this doctor who discovered that if you combine fat, sugar, salt in the right combinations, then you'll hit somebody's bliss point. You'll just release a flood of dopamine. So most processed foods now are what they call bliss point engineered. So it's basically like they're set up to to set you off, to make you more, just so you'll buy more and eat more of them. Really, it's not anything. They're not trying to get you addicted, but necessarily that wasn't the scheme. But the scheme was to get you to eat more money, to eat more of their products. So, they could sell more of it. So it was a money making thing. And mine is always going to be Oreos. I just don't go near them. I do not touch them. It'll always put me into a spiral with the sugar demons. So that's my kryptonite for sure.
All right. Great answer. And again, I just saw this comment come in from Tanya. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about. She goes, I do this all the time. She's like, winning, winning. And Sunday comes along and fail, And you know what, Tanya, that kind of resonates with me too, as well, being, in the classroom and so on. It was always like, oh man, you're doing great all week. And then all of a sudden Sunday comes and it's like the Sunday lazies or you're not being active and you just stay home and you're in the comfort of your home with your family and it's like, hey, let's go buy pizza or let's go do this and so on. And then that guilt sets in where then now you're starting off Monday already like feeling guilty. And then it's like, well, I guess if I already failed on Sunday, might as well just start the next following Monday. And I don't know, things like that can happen. But Tanya, thank you so much for your comment. All
Let
right.
me let me talk to Tanya directly real quick. Tanya,
Yes.
you got to have a different plan on the weekend than what you have for the week because the change everything is changing. So my triggers are different on the weekends than they are during the week. Yeah, yeah. Boredom is more of one on the weekend. You're just gonna have different experiences. So you can do it, but you need two plans one for the week and one for the weekend.
All right. You heard that, mi amiga. So you just got, some great advice here from Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you so much, Tanya, for your comment. All right. Question number two, Jonathan. We'll go here again. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Oh wow. Um. So I would a billboard would be don't eat sugar, right? No. I had a quote. Oh, you know what? For the sugar addiction, there's one. There's a great quote. Johann Hari wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, and it's about addiction in general, particularly with the drug war and how it's kind of failed and what all the issues are. And he has a fantastic line in there, so true, that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Um, That's what it is. When you are isolated and disconnected from people, that is what is going to really increase your sugar demons or whatever it is you're using to self-soothe. So remember, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Johan Hari, Facing the Screen, great book.
All right, definitely. Thank you so much. That's such a great quote. All right, and the last question, Jonathan, is if you can turn one of your favorite hobbies or activities into a profession, which would it be?
Wow. I would like to say writing, but I could easily become a profession. But then I think I would hate it after once I started like really being successful at it. So it was the only thing I did. I just like keeping it as a hobby right now. Maybe uh, working out. That would be cool. I mean, be a professional CrossFit athlete. I think that would be cool. But I don't know. Probably grass is always greener, right? Just
Yeah, there you
never
go.
know
Hey,
what.
you never know. There's always a chance, there's, just stay highly competitive or maybe like you said, just continue to being that coach, but just coaching people full time. Like you said, you're either coaching them physically, but you're also helping them also with their mental state and just like, just to defeat and live that the defeat the sugar demons is what I mean, but also just help them out in general, just for general well-being. So, hey, I mean, you're doing it right now, but you're also of course, being very masterful with the art of in-school suspension, because I know you've definitely been busy with that. But Jonathan, I really want to say thank you for being not only a two-time guest, but also for being very accessible. I appreciate you being able to help me out too as well and communicating one-on-one and just simply texting and things of that sort, which is great, especially for somebody that's going through, this book or going through a journey all on on their own too as well. So I really want to say thank you here publicly for just being there and just checking in and and me texting back and just to see how you're doing and how I'm doing. And that really means a lot. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, not only in the education side of things, also as well as we mentioned your book, The Art of In-School Suspension, but also through this, also the book, The Sugar Demons, and the work that you're doing there, because this affects educators in a positive way too as well, and really anybody that may be in any situation in a positive way. So thank you so much for all the work that you continue to do, and I wish you the best moving forward. And I know you've been very busy on several podcasts, so please make sure, friends of mine, listeners, watchers, that you really follow Mr. Jonathan Cranford, because he's doing some amazing things. And for all of our guests, or actually our comments, in the comment section that joined us, thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us. Thank you so much, Mel. And for all of you that are going to be rewatching this episode or listening to it later, thank you as always from the bottom of my heart for making my EdTech life what it is today. We do what we do to bring you some amazing conversations. Sometimes they may not be centered around tech, but it's centered around important points and important things that can affect the education landscape in a positive way. So thank you as always for your support. Please make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life to check out this amazing episode and the other 214 wonderful episodes with amazing educators and creators and practitioners that you can take some knowledge nuggets from and sprinkle them onto what you are already doing great. And as always, guys, I ask you to please make sure that you follow us on all your favorite podcast players. Make sure that you go to YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe. That would really help us tremendously here in the show as we continue to grow. And if you would love to contribute to our mission of connecting educators and creators one show at a time, please stop by our merch store and get yourself a shirt, a cap, a coffee mug. And as you know, all of that goes back to our show so we can bring you amazing conversations like we did today. So thank you all. And as always, my friends, until next time, don't forget, stay techie.